Greetings everyone, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, here to bring you another episode review from Season 6 of The Loud House. Today's episode is titled Scoop Snoop. First we'll discuss the plot, and then my thoughts and critiques with my final score. So, let's get right into it. In this episode, the Action News team try to cover some good news stories after receiving some hot tips. But when Katherine Mulligan shows up and steals the big scoop from them, the kids try to find out who's been leaking the stories to her. When they can't find the culprit in school, they follow Katherine and assume Principal Ramirez is the one tipping her off. But when their plan to expose their principal as the leaker backfires, and nearly costs them their news show, it turns out Katherine was only scooping the kids' stories because her new boyfriend, Rusty's dad, indirectly tipped her off by assuming Rusty's news stories were good conversation pieces. The episode ends with the kids being allowed to keep their show, and Katherine giving them some of her news equipment to make up for what she had done. Well, that concludes the plot of the episode, so now we come to my thoughts and critiques. Back in Season 5, there weren't too many great episodes starring Lincoln and pals, a lot of them being not as good as one would hope. But surprisingly, this season has been off to a pretty good start with episodes starring the Action News team, and this one didn't disappoint. I liked how the episode played around with the concept of journalism, as in demonstrating how journalists want to publish a big news story so they can get credit for being the first one to deliver the big scoop. This is where I have to give a lot of praise to the Action News team. They were expanding their show beyond just basic middle school news and trying to cover stories around the city thanks to getting some hot tips like more professional journalists receive. Even though we never get an explanation as to why they chose to expand their content, although I would assume their show might have been in danger of getting canceled if they couldn't come up with more watchable news content, it was great seeing them take the initiative and go one step further towards making their news show more enjoyable than it already was. They definitely have promising careers as journalists if all their future plans go nowhere. Of course, as journalists, any and all potential news stories are fair game to anyone, and Katherine Mulligan jumping in to steal their spotlight is not exactly unexpected. Still, even if the stories they were going to cover were not exactly major 6 o'clock news content, you do feel bad for the kids when a more well-known news reporter robbed them of the opportunity they wanted. That's when they tried to find out who was tipping off Katherine, and yet their failed attempts of luring out the culprit with fake news stories about a meat shortage and the food and fuel closing didn't go according to plan. They had the right idea to follow Miss Mulligan to get to the bottom of the issue, and now would be a good time to talk about her. For the first time, at least from what I can remember, Katherine had a more significant leading role to the plot, and we got to see what she does when she's not always doing her job. I like how she continues to refer to herself in the journalistic third person whenever she speaks. This is Katherine Mulligan, or I'm Katherine Mulligan, just like she did in the episode Scales of Justice. I always get those Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson vibes whenever she does that. Anyway, the best part of her character in this episode was how she stuck up for the Action News team after Principal Ramirez threatened to cancel their show after it was revealed she and Katherine were not conspiring together to steal the big scoop. It turned out those two were part of a book club and they were simply swapping novels, although the way they were seen talking earlier did look kinda shady. Katherine made a good point about the kids having the drive as journalists even if they didn't get all their facts in order. It reminded her of how she was first starting out as a journalist, and that's a very important lesson. For better or for worse, you'll make mistakes in the beginning and maybe some false accusations will arise, but if you didn't care about a big story you wanted to share with everyone, you wouldn't work so hard to bring it to the public's attention. Not only that, but Katherine said she was going to donate some of her news equipment to replace the phones the kids have been using since Broadcast Blues. It shows she has a lot of faith in those kids doing the right thing from now on, and I would assume she won't try to take their hot leads for her own benefit ever again, which brings us to how she got tipped off in the first place. Thanks to the clever foreshadowing of Rusty talking about his dad dating someone he calls his news boo throughout the episode, Mr. Rodney Spokes was the one using what he thought was his son's juicy gossip to tip off Katherine about the stories his son and his friends were going to cover. I'm amazed Rusty couldn't piece that puzzle together when the word news was being said, but maybe that's why he should stick to being an artistic model. I can't blame Katherine or Hot Rod Gross for what they did. Covering the news is Katherine's job, and Rusty's dad just wanted to have interesting conversations with someone who may end up becoming the future Mrs. Spokes. The one thing I noticed unresolved in the plot was never finding out what happened to that book containing fake news stories the kids planted for their principal to find. Ramirez just picks it up, drives off, and that's the last we ever see of it. It would have been nice to know if something interesting came out of that book as a result of reading it, but I guess we'll never know. And speaking of interesting, the last thing I want to talk about would be the numerous cameos and past episode references. Vic and his Gila monster and Mick Swagger make cameos as the ones being uncovered as the persons of interest in the opening news stories. Lincoln and Clyde once again dress up as their grandmothers like they did in the episode Resident Upheaval. And Zach hiding inside a bush was similar to the time he disguised himself as one in the episode Kernel of Truth. It's nice to know some things and people are not truly forgotten. Although I think the kids would like to forget seeing Rusty's dad kissing Katherine. To some, it's romantic. But to those kids, it was like, oh, that's nasty. Overall, out of every Lincoln and Pals episode in which the main conflict centers around their roles as reporters for the Action News team, this one, in my opinion, was their best so far. They took their passion for their show one step further, and they learned more on what the field of journalism is all about. Katherine Mulligan had, once again, in my opinion, her best character moments in this episode, and she really came through for the kids in a big way. The foreshadowing setting up the big reveal was pretty solid, the cameos and past episode references were good, and despite never finding out whatever happened to that book of fake news stories, this one was one of the better whodunit episodes of the series. With that said, I give Scoop Snoop an 8.7 out of 10. Well folks, that concludes my review of Scoop Snoop. I will end this review with something I found weird, but in a humorous way. When the kids thought the one leaking the hot tips to Katherine was their art teacher, it turned out their teacher was actually calling someone from an art museum to see if Clyde's painting could be put on display, and they got super bummed out about it. I'm like, what? Clyde just painted a portrait someone thought was a masterpiece, and yet the idea of him being called a great artist was the last thing on his mind? Like I said, it was a weird but funny reaction. Maybe they should have given that artistic distinction to Stella, considering how underdeveloped her character still is after nearly 3 seasons, but hey, it is what it is. So, as far as this episode goes, what did you guys think of it? Love it? Hate it? Something you would add? Change? Keep it as it is? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to this channel for the latest Loud House content. That's going to do it for me. I'll catch you guys for the next video, but until then, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, signing off. Peace out, home slices.